There is a big problem occurring in Phoenix's housing market right now that everyone in America should be paying attention to. Because what we're now seeing in Phoenix is something I call a double-barreled housing crash. This is something that all of the real estate experts, they thought this was impossible, but now it's happening, and it's going to mean that the housing crash is going to get a lot worse. Because in a double-barreled housing crash, we see not only number one, the local housing market crash, but we see number two, the rental market crash. Right now, I want to clarify for you all what exactly is happening in Phoenix, because the data is shockingly bad for all aspects of Phoenix's housing market. We've seen a 300% increase in homes for sale on the market in the last 6 months. The inventory is now higher than it was during the pandemic, and now we're seeing prices go down. That's bad for Phoenix's housing market, but what's even worse is the fact that we're seeing more and more rentals like this one on Zillow that's in a neighborhood with like 100 other vacant rentals and is just sitting there on the market. The corporate landlord has had to cut the rent 10 times and the property is still sitting vacant, which is causing huge issues for these real estate investors in Phoenix, because Phoenix is actually the number 2 real estate investor market in America. According to John Burns Real Estate Consulting, over 40% of home purchases in Phoenix recently were by an investor. And these investors were banking on a strong rental market to give them cash flow. Well, now, oops, not only is the value of your asset declining in terms of price, the rent that you can get for these assets is now declining. And it's going to lead to many of these investors fire sailing in the local housing market. Something that's actually already started. It's going to continue to get worse over the next 6 months. And why Phoenix's experience is very relevant for the US housing market overall is because Phoenix is typically the first one to either boom, like it did even before the pandemic. Phoenix was booming in 2018 and 2019 before all these other cities were, but it's also the first one to bust. It's one of the first ones historically to experience the crash. So what you're seeing in Phoenix today is something that's going to spread to other cities in America over the next 6 months. In fact, it's already spreading to these markets because we're seeing a huge uptick in rental inventory on the market pretty much all across America. And I think this might actually come as a point of confusion to some of you. I think some of you are wondering, wait a minute, how is it possible that the demand to buy homes and rent homes is going down at the same time? Because the conventional narrative suggests that if mortgage rates go up and fewer people buy, that should increase the demand for rentals. But that is not what is happening right now. And the reason that is not happening is because you should think of it not as demand for buying versus renting. It's demand for housing in general that is correlated with each other. So what happened during the pandemic, very important you all understand this as a prospective home buyer investor, was in 2021, people felt very confident because the government gave out all this free money. No one could be foreclosed on. Interest rates are low. So someone said, yeah, I'm going to buy a second home, or I'm going to buy an investor home. Or someone else said, yeah, I'm going to move out of my parents' basement, or I'm going to lose my roommate situation and get my own apartment. So at the same time, both buyers and renters were feeling more confident and demanding more real estate. But now fast forward to 2022, after prices and rents have gone up so much and interest rates are surging and the recession is here, well, all of a sudden, this confidence on both sides of the table is collapsing, which is why the demand for real estate in general is collapsing in America. And that means this housing crash is just getting started. This is just getting started because the rental market and the for sale market are now inextricably linked due to how much investor activity is in America. So if the rental market takes a dive like it is in Phoenix, that means that the for sale housing market is going to take a dive and vice versa. These things are going to feed off each other. This is like a huge indictment on real estate investors, particularly corporate real estate investors in America, because they got it so wrong on Phoenix. It's like crazy how wrong they got it on this market. Like 6 months ago, investors were saying Phoenix was the best place to be. They were saying inventory was going to stay low forever. Rent was going to go up forever. It only took 6 months for the tables to turn completely and for Phoenix now to be viewed as a housing market that should not be touched from an investment standpoint. And we're already seeing investors now like turn on Phoenix. I found a thread on LinkedIn where corporate real estate investors were talking about Phoenix, and they were all basically throwing Phoenix under the bus. They're saying, oh, this is always a boom or bust market. They're saying, oh, the people from California came, they didn't like the hot weather, and now they're leaving. And these are things that investors are going to start to realize about America's housing market in general. Like if we go to Atlanta, Atlanta is actually the #1 city for real estate investor activity in America. This is a place that's going to go the way of Phoenix over the next 6 months. We're already seeing Atlanta's for sale inventory and rental inventory surge. Don't be surprised if by the end of the year in Atlanta, not only are prices down, but rents start to go down as well, and the landlords just simply can't find a renter. Or in a place like Charlotte, this is another huge investor hotbed where investors have just bought up homes, they've built homes, and all of a sudden now, Charlotte's becoming too expensive for the local buyer or renter, and that market is starting to turn, although it's probably 6 months behind on what's going on in Phoenix. And to really give you all kind of an actionable insight here on what you as a home buyer or real estate investor can glean from this double-barreled crash in Phoenix and from the double-barreled crash that's now spreading across America, it's this. It's that affordability is everything in this housing market in late 2022. With the recession here, with rates high, with inflation at a 40-year high, you want to avoid at all costs markets that have become too expensive and are no longer affordable. Specifically, markets where the locals can no longer afford the prices and the rents, like in Phoenix, like in Vegas, like in Austin, like in Dallas, like in Tampa. These markets are all going to go down in a fiery flame, not just over the next year, but over the next 3 years, over the next 4 years, because we are now exiting the boom years of the 10-year migration cycle in America. The 10-year migration cycle, what is it? It says that once every 10 years or so in America, there's a big shift of people, there's a big boom of people moving across the country, specifically to the South and Southwest. You can see here, if we look at migration into the South over the last 30 years, there's been 3 distinct periods where there's been a boom. The first occurred in the early to mid 90s. The second occurred around 05-06. The third occurred from 2019 to 2021. We are now exiting that period. So there will simply be fewer people moving to these Sunbelt areas going forward from a structural standpoint. Just as home builders are now delivering a record number of homes and apartments actively under construction. And I actually just want to talk about the apartment situation for a second, because apartments also have a big hand in this. And if we look in Phoenix, we can see it's not just homes for rent that are declining, it's apartments for rent. According to RealPage, the apartment occupancy rate in Phoenix has plunged over the last 6 months to its lowest level in 8 years. And RealPage, they're very straightforward about this. They're saying it's jarring what's going on in the Phoenix apartment market right now. Not only are the occupancies going down, we're seeing that tenants are renewing leases at a near record low rate. Now, I know you guys want to know, what does this mean specifically for you as a home buyer out there? This deterioration in demand for rentals and apartments, what does it mean for someone who's trying to buy a house right now? And it means this: home prices are going to go down by even more, because as rents go down, prices are going to go down. And it means that any city that has a lot of real estate investor activity as well as a lot of home building, well, there's going to be big problems in those housing markets, because all these investors were banking on rental demand being there. That was the saving grace that caused a lot of investors to say, oh, maybe it's not a big deal if prices go down by 10%. Maybe it's not a big deal if mortgage and interest rates go up. At least I could rent it out and the rent is going to go up. Well, sorry, that is now changing as well, which is also great news for a lot of renters out there. These investors who are trying to take advantage of you, they overshot. They went too far, and they are now going to pay the price for it, and you are going to get cheaper rents going forward as a result. Now, before signing off, everyone, I need to brag a little bit. Because it was exactly almost 1 year ago that I put out a video, my first video on the US rental market, explaining why I thought the rental market was in a bubble and why the rental bubble was going to pop. And in that video, I said this:
Really is not a single fundamental indicator that exists right now that provides any support for something like 23% rental rate growth in Phoenix. And the longer that happens, the worse the potential crash is going to be.
Additionally, in early February of this year, I did a video on the Phoenix housing market explaining how it's the Wild West of real estate and it's going to be one of the first markets to crash. I put that video out in early February when Phoenix was still at its hottest in terms of its housing market, and only several months later, the crash started. And the reason I was able to predict these things is not because I'm smart. It's because I simply looked at the data. When you take a look at Phoenix, the typical renter went from paying 32% of their worker wages in rent to 42% in the matter of a year. Clearly that was not sustainable. It was going to lead to a structural decline in demand in real estate in Phoenix. So when you all go out now and make your home buying or real estate investment decision over the next 6 months or 12 months or 18 months, whatever your timeline is, make sure to do it with data and make sure to prioritize buying in affordable markets where locals can still afford the prices and the rents, as those are going to be the ones that have the most success over the next 5 years. And then later this week, I'm going to do a video on the top 10 cities to buy during the housing crash so you guys can understand that data. So if you want to see that video, make sure you're a subscriber. Make sure to turn on the subscribe notifications so you get an email when that video comes out. Now, the last thing I need to update you all on is evictions, because evictions are surging across America. If we take a look at local articles from cities like Charlotte and Phoenix and Orlando, we can see a huge spike in eviction numbers over the last couple months. And that's undoubtedly causing some of these issues in the rental market. But here's something that I found very strange, everyone. When I went to the national source on eviction data, a website called Eviction Lab, I noticed that they haven't updated their eviction data since August 6th, which is very strange because they were updating each week over the last 2 years, and now in over a month, there's been no update. And so when I dug into this, I found out that 4 days before Eviction Lab stopped updating their data, the White House held a summit on August 2nd, celebrating all the evictions they stopped during the pandemic. And actually, the founder of Eviction Lab was there at the White House. So now I'm asking myself, what's going on here? Why did the only national source for tracking evictions around America stop updating their eviction data 4 days after the White House declared victory on stopping evictions and 3 months before midterm elections? Why did they stop tracking that data at the same time that we're seeing local news articles say that evictions are surging? Let me know in the comments below. Is that just a coincidence, or is there something more going on here?